Hello, everyone. My name is Alyssa White, and welcome to the Dear Journal podcast, a podcast where we talk about any and everything and freak out about life together. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and let's get straight into it.
All right, y'all, welcome back to another episode. Today I'm going to talk about over or outgrowing your environment as an athlete, because I think this happens to us in a lot of different aspects or processes when we're growing up or just kind of going through the whole journey of playing a sport seriously or anything like that. And what's funny is a lot of times we don't recognize that we've outgrown a certain environment or that our environment is hurting us in a certain way. And today I just kind of want to talk about how to identify that, how to counteract that, and things like that. So I remember this episode, this kind of idea was inspired by a conversation I had with one of my friends who we grew up playing club together and were on the team for many years together. She's playing in college, and so we were just kind of reflecting on that and her experience there compared to and my experience in Spain compared to club. And what we both noticed was that a lot of times certain players get nutshelled into a certain perception from a coach. And I know this happened, at least to me, when it was the year I came back from my first knee surgery. And you get very much nutshelled into the perception that you're a not as good player who just has good days. And then there were players who were the opposite of that, who was they were good players who had some bad days. And so it was we'd be playing, right, and say one of these players who was considered to be better was just not performing well and that kind of thing. In the coach's eyes, they were perceived as just having a bad day, and that was it. And, but they're still up here, you know what I'm saying? But somebody else who was performing really well, maybe scored a goal or something, had a really good game, that was just lucky. It wasn't a baseline. The baselines for these two players are just different in the perceptions from the coaches. So you get nutshelled into this kind of perception from them that it was just lucky, or you just were in the right spot at the right time and that kind of thing. And it just kind of takes any authority away from you in how you performed. And I thought that was just really interesting because I never had thought about it that way. And when my teammate said that, I was like, dang, you're really onto something here, because that is very much something that happens, and it happened on my team, happens on every team, I think, that, whether the coach means to or not, definitely will nutshell players into that certain kind of pocket of, okay, their baseline is lower down here, but they were just having a good game, when that's not necessarily true a lot of times. But it's just they give a write-off to these other players who they consider better or good, when maybe that's not the case either. And so it was really interesting to think about, because the teammate had experienced that on her team in college, and I had definitely experienced that in Spain and seen it, not personally, that's the other thing. When I went to Spain, the environment very much was different for me, and I think I definitely thrived in that kind of environment where the style of play was different, and that's what I had been looking for, honestly. I think that, being able to move environments and go to Spain and just a completely different style of play and coaching and whole different kind of soccer world and all of that very much helped me kind of understand that no, I wasn't this baseline player either, which was hard coming back from a knee surgery and being nutshelled into that. Honestly, I think it was also just because I was coming back from a knee surgery, in that, they didn't expect a lot from me right at the start, and that's fine. I had to get back into it, but this was the next year, and I was ready to go, and I was still nutshelled, I think, into that kind of perception that it would just be a good day if I was playing well. So when I got to Spain, I was, pretty much fully back. I was in shape. It was going really well, and I was very much enjoying playing. I was starting, like everything was kind of working out in that way, and it was because the environment was very much suited towards, well, one, my skill set, which was great, and just kind of the perception of, well, smaller players as well. Like in the U.S., smaller players are not going to be getting as much attention. It's very, especially in the South where I was, it was like big players are just seen as good no matter their foot skills. It was just like, they're huge, they must be good. And I was like, I don't understand how that correlates. But okay, this isn't like basketball where like height is necessary sometimes, right? Now, if you're a goalkeeper, that's different. But like on the field, no. And so I knew that in club, I was just kind of in that nutshell, and there was nothing I could necessarily do about it. And I know I needed an environment change. That is one reason I didn't play college soccer here, because I knew that the type of environment that I wanted was just different, and it had always been my dream to play in Europe regardless. And yet, yeah, like I knew I needed an environment change. And what's interesting, and I think I've talked about this with some other people as well before, is just that the environment to which you grow up in very much shapes how you play. Because I grew up very much, I think, with more free play, lots of possession-based practices where you're just playing. It's not as structured where you're doing like strategy and you're in your 11v11 like formation and you're running kind of, plays in a sense, or looking at patterns. That's kind of something we didn't really do very often, at least in the club that I grew up in. And in that way, I think that I developed a lot more being able to just free play and have that constant flow of play and ideas, because that just kind of has to develop naturally. It's like when you see players who grew up playing like on the streets and stuff in like South America and things like that, like they're just constantly playing without rules, so they're experimenting, they're having fun, and so these natural kind of talents develop in, just your quick switch in what you do like on the ball. And I remember having this conversation with somebody who grew up in a much more like structured club environment where they were constantly just kind of learning patterns. They weren't really like playing free play as often, and so they didn't develop that like quick switch with like ideas of how to win 1v1s and things like that, because those very much come from just like a pure just playing environment. But they had the strategy side that I didn't really have. That is definitely something I learned when I went to Spain was, how to actually break down the game and think about it in that sense. Because I had never, we did strategy, but not really. Like, in the 1 year that I think I had a very good coach that knew strategy really well and was just super knowledgeable about the game at my club, I was injured, and so I was out the whole time. And so I never really got to experience their coaching fully. And so that was very much a surprise to me, just seeing the different environments. I knew that, the way they play over in Spain and Europe is very different in general, but just the way that they are looking at the game is very different. And they're not just stuck in one style of play either. Like, it is very possession based, and that's kind of the go-to, but at least my coach was very good at adapting to what the other team was doing. And so, he's breaking down things for you. We'd have meetings, and I know they do that in college as well, but this was kind of just a different level, kind of talking about the different ways we would attack, the different ways we're defending, and had like a slideshow about it, and we were expected to kind of learn those and implement them. And so we would set up 11v11, and then you're playing those patterns over and over again. And gosh, we did that a lot, honestly. Like, I remember we were there for like doing this for like an hour at practice, just running the same kind of pattern because we weren't getting it right. We weren't executing the timing and things like that right. And it's all about being able to visualize these kind of patterns in the game. And we didn't do that when I was growing up, really. It was really just like, okay, get on the field and play. And so, you lack the strategical side, but you also kind of figure things out on your own because, we would do something, we figure out that it worked, and then you go from there, right? But you also develop your own kind of skill set with that because you have the freedom to play however you see fit, right? And I have a feeling with a more structured environment, you would get probably like coached more on, hey, like play there, or, you should have been doing this. And it's just like different because I think you can grow up lacking one side more. But I do think it's easier growing up in more of a free play setting because that's something that can't really be learned when you're older as much because it's just like in the way you're developing in your brain and as a player, right? Like you have just kind of like a set skill set that you're taking from after that you've developed since being a kid. And if you didn't really develop that as a kid and you have like just the strategy part, I think it's very hard to then learn that. It's not impossible. You definitely can. You just have to practice more, and I would say play in more free environments. Like one of my favorite places to go train it was just this kind of thrown together warehouse pickup games that now it's actually being redone as a more legit like kind of place, but it was so fun because you would literally just go play pickup games and people were, like you're megging each other and just kind of finding these tiny combinations because it was tiny. Like it was a very just small like area that we were playing, and there would be like 6v6 in this tiny little warehouse looking thing. And so like there's constant pressure, and so you learn how to escape these tight spaces with certain skill sets. Maybe you're megging them, and it was just really fun. Like I remember just pulling out some random trick that I had not necessarily done on the field because, you have a lot more time and space. But knowing that I could do that later in a game if I did get stuck in like a tight situation like that, it just makes you think a lot faster, obviously, with a lot more pressure. And so those environments I think were great to develop your, fast decision making and everything like that. And if you didn't get that growing up, I think you lack a lot of that quick decision making is what it is. And that's half the game is making decisions. When do you dribble? When do you pass? When are you supposed to shoot? All of that. And it's just very interesting in what sort of environments you develop certain skills. And so I think there's definitely a time where you outgrow your environment and see just how your other one has developed you or things like that. And I think it's really interesting to think about what sort of environments produce successful athletes because it's very, your environment includes, your coaches, who you're surrounding yourself with, what are you doing in your off time when you're not playing, and everything in between, right? Even what you're like consuming like on social media and things like that is all your environment. And if you're not creating kind of like an environment where you're gonna do well, then yeah, it's obviously gonna affect you negatively. So what I learned was when I was in Spain, it was like, there were different levels of commitment on my team of what they wanted out of that year in the program and everything like that. So some people were there knowing they wanted to play pro and, pursue that and get pro contracts at the end of the year. Others were just kind of figuring out if they still wanted to play, or maybe this was the last year that they could play and that this is what they were here for. And that being said, it was interesting, like, who is kind of taking the time to do things outside of practice and things like that. Because we were pretty much like living, breathing it the entire time, and we were only really doing soccer. So it was like we were already doing a lot, but doing extra things and just kind of like how they took care of themselves off the field and everything like that. Like nutrition, are they resting enough, that kind of thing. And then one big thing that I finally started doing this year is actually watching soccer, like Premier League and Champions League. I did not watch that at all, really, when I was in the US, like growing up. Not really at all. And so that was definitely something that I got like clowned for when you're in Europe. Like, if you don't watch any soccer, like, come on. As a soccer player, that is so embarrassing. And but there's there's a lot of benefits to it. I just always it's so sad to say, but I just loved playing the sport when I was growing up. I didn't like watching it, and I didn't like watching it because I just want to be on the field every time I was watching it. So I just didn't like it. So that being said, when I went to Europe, it was like, how do you not know who these certain players are? And I didn't. I had no idea. Obviously, I know the big ones, but like, could I name like 10, 20 players? Maybe, maybe not. So that was also just kind of like, the whole environment there is very much around soccer, and that's what I wanted. That's half the reason I went to Europe as well, is because everybody there cares about soccer. And that's why it is such a big deal. And even if, you're not on that, maybe like Real Madrid or Barcelona, but you're still on like a top team in Spain, like that team, that city is going to know who you are, and you're still going to get like a lot of recognition just from the townspeople. Like, as you're walking around, they know who you are because everybody cares about their local team there. And that just kind of environment is going to, shape you into a certain person who thinks about the game all the time and that kind of thing. And that's what I wanted. I still want a very professional environment going back. And just the way that you take your time outside of the sport and everything like that very much shapes, your environment. And a lot of people talk about natural talent and things like that, and, having natural athletic ability. But when you're growing up, I think that your environment, really will turn out that kind of talent. It's not even necessarily about how you're built physically, I think. I think it's really just like, were you playing pickup when you were younger? Were you experimenting, just having fun with the game and naturally developing those skills? And then as you're growing up, are you putting in the time and the effort? Because, you can have some natural talent growing up, but if you're not like putting in those hours, then you're definitely, it's not there. And I mean, they say you have to have like, I don't even know, like thousands of hours to really get to a level of like mastery. And when you've been playing since you're like 4 and you're, in your late teens now or in your early 20s, I mean, that is definitely a level that is hard to get to. Not everybody makes it past that and sticks with it, especially at a high level. And so, everybody at that degree has a certain level of mastery. And you have to acknowledge, like, what am I doing, though, that sets me apart? And it is very much your environment. I think everybody's environment is what sets them apart. And when you've outgrown the external environment that is not for you anymore, and you need to change, then I think that that's important to take that step, because you're only going to continue to be nutshelled into whatever kind of person you were there, whatever kind of player you were on this certain team. If you were looked at as a role player and not like a leader or an impact player, then you don't want to be stuck there, because they're not going to see you any differently, maybe if you're nutshelled into this perception, right? And that was one thing I think that was also very beneficial for me going to Spain, is taking on even maybe like a unofficial leadership role on the field, just in the position I was in, and holding mid, because you see a lot of the field, you're a conductor of the game, and that was pretty fun. And growing up, I had always been told, that you need to be louder on the field, and I never really was. I was just kind of like, okay, I'm going to call for the ball when I go, but besides that, that's like, I didn't really talk that much. And there I very much developed a skill of, conducting the game and talking to my teammates more about where I needed them, especially the attacking mids, communicating with them like, hey, I need you to drop back when I go here. And with the formation that we were playing, it required a lot of communication because we were playing a 3-5-2, which I had never played before, which was also a whole new environment, right? Even holding mid was a whole new thing for me because I was always playing attacking positions. Okay, I was not a defender growing up, and yet developed, I think, a whole nother skill set inside of my game because I was thrown into this kind of new environment, new formation, where I very much got to kind of conduct and control the pace at which we were playing, which was really fun. But with the 3-5-2, I had to communicate to my attacking mids because they needed to step out when we were shifting sides and things like that. And I very much learned to step into that role, and very much grew from it. So it's like when you're put in these new positions, these new environments, and you're challenged in that way, it's like, are you going to rise to that occasion or not? And then you can assume all these different roles, but if you're stuck in this one environment and this one perception from the one coach, it can ruin it for you. I knew so many players that the coach made them hate the sport after a while. Like, they made them want to quit. And I'm like, wow, like, that is so sad because, as a coach, I don't think you're not doing your job at all if you're making everybody want to quit. Like, you can push people and have that mentality, but at the end of the day, when we're still in like club, it's like supposed to be fun as well. So them just kind of pushing that agenda onto all the players and forcing a very toxic environment, honestly, then, I really admire all the girls that stuck through that as well. But, knowing I needed a change was just the most important thing to me, honestly, because I knew I didn't want to play in the U.S., to be honest. I do think that, don't get me wrong, there's so many amazing things happening for women's sports in the U.S. and especially for soccer, but I wanted to play in Europe and get that experience and that way of life just with soccer and football, just living with the sport like that. And so I think, growing up and seeing which kind of environment you grew up in, and, did you have that more strategy-based development, or did you have a more free-playing environment? And then kind of realizing, what do I still need to work on then? And creating the best environment for yourself is going to help you in the long term a lot. If you did have more strategy-based development, then definitely, go play some pickup. Just go start, developing those skills, because then when you get on the field and you're stuck in a sticky situation, it's going to be like second nature to maybe, do a little rollover and out, right? Or meg somebody and get out, You're not going to think about it as much or be like freeze stoned, like you'll be able to find a way out. And that was really just what I wanted to talk about today, because I think if you are another soccer player, athlete, whatever, and I think everybody gets nutshelled into a certain perception sometimes from coaches, and it's very hard to stick to, what and know that and have that self-confidence in yourself in playing, that it wasn't just a lucky day. Like, I knew what I was doing during that, and it was intentional, right? Then you might just need a change of environment, change of coach, that kind of thing, because I still think at the end of the day, whatever you do on the field is what you're doing, but a coach can definitely impact a lot of how you're playing. It also impacts your playing time. So if you're not getting a lot of playing time, that is a very important factor in your environment and how you're going to develop, because if you're not getting time to play, then it's a lot harder to continuously improve on those skills and just like your knowledge of the game. So, that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. I'm going to continue to do episodes about, athletics and sports and soccer and everything like that. If you guys want more episodes talking about these kind of topics, if they help you, just let me know. Leave a comment or something. And I'll, kind of continue to talk about these things. I think a lot of these things aren't talked about, and they very much impact your mentality on the field and your mental health as well. So, yeah, if you have been struggling with your environment and everything like that and know you need to change, I encourage you to take that step, because I think you'll very much grow into a new kind of role and see what else is out there for you as far as playing, and just you as an athlete and your development. So, yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you guys next time.
Thank you so much for listening to the Dear Journal podcast, and I hope you enjoyed diving into today's topic. If you want to continue to get updates and stay notified, you can either turn on the notifications or follow me on Instagram at alyssa.white.22. That is all for today's episode, and I hope I see you next time.